Hello and welcome to Success is Never Accidental. I'm Lynne Peyton and I'm passionate about helping organisations to get better results. And it's my belief that the key to success is to strengthen the leadership. So I created the Core Leadership Programme many years ago to help strengthen both individual and agency capacity in 4 core areas. The C is for communication. Great leaders are effective communicators, and that includes the capacity to listen, to fully understand. The O is for optimization. As leaders, we need to make the best use of all the resources at our disposal, and that often starts with our own mindset. The R is for relationships. Good leaders are great at both forming and maintaining relationships, both within their organisation and in other agencies and organisations. And the E is for evaluation, so that we get better at analysing what is it we're doing that is most effective and do more of it. In this podcast, I get to interview some highly successful people across all sectors so that you can better understand their formula for success and start to identify all the contributory factors. So welcome to Success is Never Accidental. My guest today is Professor John Devaney, who's Dean of the School of Social and Political Science at Edinburgh University. John is a qualified social worker who practiced for almost 20 years before transitioning to social work education and academia. His research interests relate to the impact of adversity in childhood across the life course, domestic abuse, child maltreatment, and he's particularly interested in reviewing those situations so we can better understand how better to intervene to support children and families. John has published 3 books relating to domestic violence and abuse and over 100 articles, book chapters, and reports. His current research is looking internationally at children's experience after parental intimate partner homicide. And he's looking at that in the UK, Ireland, and Australia. And he's also helping the Scottish Government at the moment create a new model for the review of domestic homicides and suicides. So please help me welcome Professor John Devaney. John, thank you so much for joining us today at the end of what I know has been an incredibly busy day.
I'm delighted to be here, Lynne, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
John, Tony Robbins always says our destiny is created by the decisions we make. So let's just pitch right in and tell us what influenced you to choose social work as a career.
Really interesting question. When I was at school, I was planning to go into civil engineering and was doing all my exams that were leading me in that direction. And then I ended up doing some voluntary work with young people with disabilities and really enjoyed that working directly with other people. And through that came into contact with some social workers who were also involved with the young people and thought, well, actually, here's a career where not only am I able to do things which hopefully are helpful to others, but I get so much personally from it. And so in a way, I accidentally fell into social work through doing voluntary work and really haven't looked back since.
That's so funny, John, because I was always going to be a teacher, but I worked in a holiday camp my first year after school, which exposed me to people with a whole lot of challenges that I knew nothing about. And I thought, gosh, what an interesting world it would be. And I changed to social work as well. So you had a very promising career in practice for many years. So why pivot into education and academia?
Yeah, it wasn't something that was planned, but something which happened along the way. And like most decisions in terms of my career over the past 35 years, it's been that opportunities have arisen. And I've, at the time, thought, would this be something that's personally interesting and something that actually would be a good thing to do because it'll strengthen my ability to practice in some way. And as a practitioner, I was always interested in trying to think about what is the evidence that informs what we do that, of course, intuition is really important. Having a strong value base, having good skills are all essential components of good social work practice, but so also is having an evidence base upon which to draw. So through wonderful opportunities I had with my employers in Northern Ireland, I was able to do some research methods training, and then had a wonderful opportunity to go off and do a PhD with the support of my employer. I did that for 3 years, came back to practice again, really enjoyed that, but realized that I wouldn't have the opportunity to do further research because of the busyness of practice. And therefore, if I wanted to do further research, we'd need to move into academia. And in a way, moving into academia allowed me to influence things in a different way, from a different angle, thinking about how we prepare social workers, both who are coming into the profession, as well as also continuous professional development for those who are already in practice and have lots of experience, but also want to have an opportunity to reflect on that experience and incorporate research and new evidence, but also an opportunity to undertake research that hopefully is very practice and policy orientated.
So it's so interesting, isn't it, John, that we need to have evidence to support whatever we do. And it seems to me that you're quite driven in your current role, given all of the various projects you're supporting at present, to help inform practice. So tell us, what are some of the things that you're doing at the moment in that whole world of domestic violence, which seems to be becoming ever increasing in terms of the numbers of people impacted? What is some of the evidence they're telling us?
Yeah, it's sort of, you're right that there's been greater public awareness as well as professional awareness about the issue of domestic violence and abuse. And I think what that's done is create a space where people are saying, well, what can research tell us about the scale and scope and nature of domestic violence and abuse, as well as the impact, and what ways of intervening are likely to be most helpful, both for adult and child victims, but also in terms of addressing the behaviour of those who use violence and abuse in their intimate relationships. And I think we're at different levels of understanding about all of those issues, where we have a lot of research now which helps us understand about the prevalence and the nature and the scope of domestic violence and abuse, and a growing body of evidence about which individuals who use violence and abuse can be worked with and can be helped to disengage from that type of behaviour and move on with their lives in a way which is less problematic to others. So some of the work we've been doing at the University of Edinburgh has been looking at trying to work out how many young children are in families experiencing domestic violence and abuse. And of those who are experiencing domestic violence and abuse, how does their social and emotional development compare to those who are living in households where there's not domestic violence and abuse? And that's important for two reasons. One, it's important to try and think about what help can we provide for those children to help them with the adversity that they've experienced. But it also helps us to recognize that even if professionals aren't intervening, actually, usually the child's parent, who's also a victim, typically their mother, actually is a really supportive and protective person in the life of the child. So as well as trying to think about how do we support children, it's also important to think about how we support the adult parent in terms of both their own experiences and also trying to protect and nurture that parenting role and bond between the child and adult. So that's one area of research that we've been exploring in recent years. And another is looking at what happens to children and young people whenever a parent is killed by the parent's current or former intimate partner, which quite often is the child's other parent. What happens in the immediacy after that event, but also what's the long-term impact in terms of a child going into an adult and their sense of identity about what they've experienced.
It's heavy work, John, isn't it? I mean, social workers dealing with these issues can find it very challenging and have to regulate their own emotional response to it. And those of you who are researching this work also have to review some really, really sad and very, in some cases, very violent cases. How do you cope from a mindset point of view to stay emotionally resilient?
I think there's been an increasing recognition within social work practice and also research on these difficult issues about the importance of self-care and also thinking about self-care, not just being about leaving this to an individual to take care of themselves, but thinking about how do we put in place systems and processes around individuals so that they can be held, and that even if we all think that we can get on with it because we'll all be doing this work for a long period of time, never do assume that somebody won't need support. So it's important to have people that you can debrief with after research interviews where you're talking about these difficult interviews. It's also good, I know some colleagues keep journals or logs as a way of recording their feelings and emotions about things, and that allows them to try and process those sorts of issues. And also being parts of communities of practice, people who are researching or practicing in a similar field, where actually you know that when you're talking about the type of research you're doing and the likely impact on oneself, that actually they can relate to that as well. And so there's a sense of you're not overburdening somebody else by wanting to talk to them about these things, because you know that there is that reciprocity in terms of how people can support one another, as well as also having the other side of things, which is some good healthy habits. So for example, you'll be surprised that sort of even at my advanced years, I'm still playing football very poorly once a week, but physical exercise is a good way of just looking after oneself, having a different space to go into that can sort of create a way of trying to separate work from other aspects of life.
And it's one of the things that comes up all the time when I'm doing leadership work in both children's services and mental health organisations. So it always bears repeating that we can't take care of other people unless we first of all take care of ourselves. And I know that that's very much emphasised now in both in training for social work and all the other professions that are involved in supporting people in community. And it's not just about having the exercise, that other word that you said is so important, John, about having appropriate boundaries. You know, we need to be able to switch off from work at the end of the day. We need strategies for doing that. So you lead a huge team at the moment, and that team's involved in so many different projects, both national and internationally significant projects. How do you both build, support, empower your team to help them keep doing what they're doing?
It's a really good question, Lynne. And I suppose, it's not one I ever feel I'm completely on top of, which is why I think that things such as your podcast are really helpful to sort of hear from other leaders and people who are sort of managing teams or programs of work about how they do that. And I think it's being open to the fact that, one, I want to have feedback from people about whether the type of support and the structures around governance and leadership and management that we have, whether they work for them or not. So that if we could be achieving the same outcome in a different way by doing things in a different way, I'm really open to hearing that feedback, because what I don't want is people being stressed out by the job itself, and then by the way that we organize the work around them. The way that we organize the work should support them to do the difficult work that they're engaged in. So I think part of that is being reflective and being open to hearing feedback from others. I think another one is about having clear structures and rules and responsibilities so people know what they're responsible for, and then trying to get that balance between not micromanaging somebody else, but empowering them and supporting them to do the thing that fits within their role and responsibilities, but also them knowing that even if it is within their own responsibilities, there may be times when they do want to come and use me as a sounding board or to clarify something, or for me to come in and help them with a tricky issue. So that sense of people feeling they can get on with things, they are accountable for it, there'll be opportunities to talk about what they're doing and to get feedback on that, but also they're not just left to their own devices when it comes to the harder or trickier issues.
And as leaders, we have to create that sense of trust, don't we? That you expect them to get on with it. It may not all go according to plan. They might make mistakes, and you want them to feel that they can come and talk to you when things haven't gone well. And what do you do, John? Because not everything goes according to plan. So how do you manage when things come off the rails a wee bit? What strategies do you use?
Yeah, I've always been drawn towards some of the principles of authentic leadership, whereas sort of accept that, I will make mistakes, and that sort of, if I do make mistakes, to own them, and to be reflective enough to either ask others to help me reflect on what might have been a different way to get to the place that we wanted to be in, or to get feedback from others to say, yeah, you're right, that went bad, and it probably went even worse than you thought it was. But here's my feedback about sort of what you could do differently in the future. So I think there's a bit of that, being open to that, because I think that creates a culture whereby other people feel it's okay. Yeah, not everything, we should all enter into things with the right spirit and intention, but sometimes things don't land the way that we would have wanted them to. It can be for a whole variety of reasons, sometimes poor planning, other times other events may overtake our plans, but at least having a process where we're open to reflection on those sorts of things, I think really helps. I think also having some good colleagues, both in the institution and outside the institution, helps. So peers and mentors, people that I know I can turn to for advice and can trust. And within the school that I manage within the university at the moment, I have a very strong working relationship with what we call the Director of Professional Services. So he's the person who line manages all of the administrative aspects of the school. And we see each other as sort of really co-leading the school, as opposed to sort of on paper, yeah, it maybe doesn't look that way. But again, having somebody where I'm able to sit down, have very open conversations with, and problem solve together and try and strategize around certain issues. And that's personally very supportive, as well as also being a good role model, hopefully, for how we want the school and the wider institution to operate.
And in social work, there's a long tradition, and I'm sure in other disciplines as well, there's a long tradition of supervision being that safe, reflective space where people can reflect on their work, but also reflect on their career and look at their own growth. But sometimes it can be very limiting. So I'm glad to hear you saying that we all need mentors and peers and other people that we can check in with or use as a sounding board. And I think the concept of mentoring is becoming more embedded in professional education and postgraduate education.
And most definitely is. And I think it's trying to think about both formal mentoring schemes, and there are some really excellent ones which can be about mentoring for colleagues with certain characteristics, mentoring programs for women in management, for example, or in universities, people of color, having mentoring schemes which are helping them have somebody who can help them navigate all of those structural barriers and issues within any institution, but also the informal mentoring that goes on, and that can sometimes be under-recognized in institutions. The fact that that's a really valuable role for people to fulfill, that it should be evenly distributed, but there's probably certain people have qualities that mean that sort of informally others are drawn towards them on a more regular basis. And how do you capture it in a way that's the person who's providing all of that informal mentoring themselves doesn't become overloaded? Because the reason people are probably interested in looking to them for support and advice and guidance is because they're very approachable and they're always prepared to do something for somebody else. So I think,
and it's a muscle we really need to strengthen in everybody, isn't it? That if we use buddying systems or different kind of strategies to encourage people to be peer supporters and informal mentors. And one of the great things that BASWA has done recently, and I was very happy to be a part of helping to set that up initially in Northern Ireland, and then we joined to the Professional Support Service, is that availability for social workers throughout the UK now, that they have that access to professional support and coaching. And as part of that, I've coached people at all levels in organisations. And one of the things that really struck home is just how much support senior managers need in organisations and how isolated they can feel. So message today, I think, regardless of how senior you are, it's important that you have peer support. It's important you have supervision. It's also important that you get access to mentoring and coaching, whether that be within your own organisation or more generally. John, so many of the issues that you're currently exploring and trying to help us strengthen our interventions in are multi-agency issues. Domestic violence involves so many different agencies, mental health agencies, the police, the justice service, as well as doctors and social workers. It's so important, isn't it, that we continue, because what's happening at the moment is all of the professions are struggling to recruit and retain people. So we are seeing staff shortages right across the board. But it's so important in that situation that we work together even more effectively rather than retreat into silos. You're so knowledgeable in this area of multidisciplinary practice. How do we make sure it stays as really an important factor in all of our thinking, in case management, in strategic planning, up and down organisations?
It's a really good question. Earlier today, we had a supervision session with one of my PhD students, and she's doing work which is looking at multi-agency working around this risk assessment in relation to domestic abuse. And we're getting into this about how do you ensure that you don't have professionals who are working together, but really in parallel with one another, rather than in an integrated fashion. And you and I have talked about this on previous occasions about sort of how people can think that they're working together rather than really just sharing information with each other, but going off and doing their own thing. I think probably a core element of that, and it's tied into resource constraints at this moment in time, is about the opportunity for joint training, where people come together as peers around the topic or issue that they're going to be working together on and do training together on that. So much of what seems to be happened in recent years is about sort of professionals going on to do unidisciplinary training, which talks about multidisciplinary working, but actually people don't do multidisciplinary training together as a way to start to get a clearer sense of people's roles, responsibilities, and their different worldviews, so that if we're talking about risk, how that might be understood from a police officer's perspective might be very different from a community nurse compared to a social worker. And actually, they could all be talking about risk, but actually what they mean is very different things. They're working across purposes with one another. So I think one of the foundational building blocks, I think, is that sort of opportunities for regular multidisciplinary training as a way to underpin multidisciplinary working.
I also note that some of the things you're doing at the moment are really international. Why is it so important that we learn from best practice in other countries?
Yeah, I think in most countries which are more similar to the UK than dissimilar, they're economically better off, and they have a longer tradition of public services. I think when you look at those countries, we're all, on the whole, dealing with the same sorts of challenges. Some of them are challenges about the substantive issues that children or families or adults are facing in their lives, but also social and macroeconomic policies in those countries and how they work for some people, but maybe don't work for others. And nobody's got the perfect solution, but maybe people have approached things from a different angle, and that different angle has shed new insights or new ways of working that can be beneficial for others to know about. Doesn't automatically mean that because something works in one jurisdiction, it'll automatically work in another. But at least we should be open enough to realize that we've got enough challenges without also being so standoffish that we think we can't learn from somebody else, because actually that learning from somewhere else may be the key insight that allows us to make progress on one of the range of issues that we're struggling with. And it's also reassuring to know sometimes that, sometimes this is hard work and we may not feel as though we're making as much progress as we want to, but it's not because we're not working hard enough or doing the right thing. People in other places report exactly the same thing, and it can be easy enough to sort of think that, we're struggling. We may find it hard with this issue, but actually we're still doing the best we can, given the legal, economic, and resource issues that are the boundaries within which we have to practice.
And sometimes we have to accept that there are limitations and do the best that we can within those. But interesting, like you said, I think everybody's working really hard at the moment. one of the things I try to encourage them to do is work more effectively and, instead of just being busy, actually getting results. But I get concerned sometimes about how often people talk about feeling overwhelmed or stressed. And, that just really indicates that there's either a real or perceived lack of control. You have an enormous workload and a very wide brief, and you're involved in all kinds of national and international work, as well as doing your day job. What are some of the things that you do to keep yourself on top of things, to help you feel that you are in control and that you can manage whatever you're currently planning and whatever else they throw at you?
Yeah, I think one of the things always to try and say, well, is this something that I'm solely responsible for and I'm the only person who's responsible for this and can do anything about? And the answer is usually no. Usually we're part of decision-making chains, we're members of teams and groups of people who work with each other. And therefore that old adage, a problem shared is a problem halved. It's not to try and feel as though you have to take all this upon yourself. Actually, at those points in time when I feel sort of things are all getting a bit much for me, that's usually the time when I do reach out to other people and say, who are working on a project with me or who are part of the leadership team within the school or the university, and say, listen, this is all getting a bit much at the moment. Is there any way we can have a chat here about either you might be able to pick up some things at this moment in time because I'm afraid of dropping them, knowing that that's also ensuring that in the future, if somebody came to me, that I'm in that position where I would reciprocate to them, and try and create that culture where people feel, well, it's okay to sort of move things around from time to time so that, everybody may be busy, but nobody's overburdened too much of the time for too long. So I think that's one way. The other is about trying to learn how to prioritize. It's never a perfect art, but it is that bit about trying to juggle competing priorities and trying to have some sort of rule of thumb as to which are the things that need your attention at a moment in time when there's lots of things screaming for your attention. And being reflective enough to constantly sort of look at whether or not that prioritization worked, and whether it was necessary in the way that it happened, because sometimes you can prioritize the things which maybe are easier to do or the ones which are emotionally less labor intensive, and so therefore it's good to sort of challenge oneself about whether I'm avoiding certain things because either there's too much work in that at the moment, or I just know that that's going to be a real drain on my personal resources, but it may be the most important thing that needs to get done at that moment in time.
That's very interesting. So first of all, acknowledge there's an issue, then analyze it a bit, then prioritize, talk to others to try and retain a sense of perspective, which I think sometimes gets lost. And then the other thing we really need to do at the end of every day is celebrate just how much we actually got done.
Mm-hmm.
And in the helping professions, how many people we left better than we found them, how many people we actually helped. If there was one thing, John, last question, if there was one thing you would tell your younger self, what would it be?
Oh, it's a good question, isn't it? Yeah. It's like one of those desert island disc questions. Wish I had it prepared for that. I think I was younger self. I'd probably say I think to worry less about what others think of me and just continue to sort of do the things that I think are right, but continue to be open to other people giving me feedback.
Fantastic. John Devaney, thank you so much for spending time with us today and for giving us so many insights and sharing your wisdom.
Not all in, and thanks for the opportunity. And again, there's been lots of people who have supported me in my career along the way and have been good role models, and you've been one of them. Somebody who I've sort of always sort of thought, well, actually, you're a person who lives your values, and also somebody who has that reflective nature of thinking about how can you seek to incorporate learning in a way which is helps and is resourceful rather than sort of beating yourself up because it always feels as though you're pushing a rock up the hill all the time. So thank you for this opportunity this afternoon.
Thank you. Just so many fascinating insights from John Devaney, and I probably won't do them all justice, but we'll have a go anyway. John said, be open to opportunities, especially when it's something that interests you. All practice, regardless of what profession or business we're in, should be evidence-based. We all need to be more informed about not just the scope of domestic violence and its prevalence, but how it impacts on the lives of all involved. And it occurs to me that as a society, everyone needs to do our part, whatever that is. Maybe it's just sometimes just lending a hand, being kind, volunteering. But given that we know how much of the impact, not just on children, but on the adult victim in those situations, maybe we just need to be more aware to the fact that a kind word can go a long way. And then for all those professionals out there whose daily task is to help in all kinds of challenging and sometimes really disturbing situations in both the health, social care, police, justice sectors, it's so important that you all practice self-care and have mechanisms in place to process the events of the day so that you have boundaries between work, and then you're freed up to enjoy your own time in the evening. And some of that is just about practicing self-care, making sure that you do take exercise, you do get out in the fresh air, that you're careful to manage your nutrition, that you drink water, and that you improve your sleep habits. John talked about how essential teamwork is, because teams should be that safe space where we also feel nurtured and cared for. And he emphasised the importance of transparency within teams and creating opportunities for feedback and reflection. He also acknowledged that even senior leaders make mistakes, that mistakes are inevitable. It's how we learn from them that matters. And that requires a willingness to consider what happened and then look at how it can be avoided going forward. And he talked about how everyone needs to have mentors and support people, go-to people who provide that safe space for reflection and come up with other ideas and suggestions. And then we asked him what was one thing that he might tell his younger self. And John said, and this is good advice for everybody listening here today, worry less about what other people think of you and do what you know is right. Thank you for joining me today. And if you personally or your team could benefit from the core leadership program or from coaching or mentoring on core leadership skills, do reach out to me at lynne@lynnepeyton.com. And remember, success is never accidental.